Story 1. I thought it was a prank at first. Just a stupid joke. My friend Carla and I had been hiking in the woods for hours, enjoying the peace and quiet. It wasn't anything too remote, just a few miles off the main trail, where the trees were thicker and the air smelled like pine needles. Carla kept joking about how the place looked like a scene from a horror movie, but I just rolled my eyes. We were both tired, but the sun was still up, so I suggested we explore one more path before heading back. That's when we found the cabin. It wasn't on any of the maps we'd seen. A small, dilapidated structure, nearly hidden by overgrown ivy and shrubs. It looked ancient, like it had been abandoned for decades, but it wasn't falling apart. The windows were covered in grime, the door slightly ajar, the kind of thing that makes you instinctively want to turn around. But curiosity got the better of us. We were only going to peek inside, I promised myself. We would just see if anyone was there, make sure it wasn't a hunting shack or something. Carla was already pushing the door open before I could say anything. "Hello?" she called out. Her voice was louder than I expected, and it sent a shiver down my spine. The woods were eerily quiet now, and the air seemed to grow thicker the longer we stood there. I followed her inside, reluctantly. The smell hit me first, damp and musty, like rotting wood and mildew. The floor creaked under our feet, and the beams above us groaned with the weight of years. I could tell right away that no one had been here for a long time. No signs of recent life, no belongings, just layers of dust and decay. "Maybe we should leave," I said, but Carla was already moving deeper into the cabin, poking through a few scattered things on the table. A dirty old lantern, a few faded newspapers, a cracked mug. Nothing that seemed out of place. Then I saw it. On the wall, behind the table, was a collection of pictures, all pinned with dull nails. At first, I thought they were just random old photos, but as I stepped closer, I felt my stomach drop. The faces were blurred, distorted in some way, like someone had scratched or smeared the images. But what really struck me was the series of dates written underneath each one. Each photo had a year, no captions, just the numbers. The last photo in the row was of a woman. She looked normal enough, except for the fact that she was looking directly at the camera. It wasn't a smile. It wasn't even a neutral expression. It was unsettling. Her eyes were hollow, as though she was staring straight into me. The date underneath her image was recent. Way too recent. I felt a cold chill crawl up my spine. I turned around to tell Carla we needed to go, but when I looked at her, I froze. She was staring at something. Not at me. Not at the pictures. She was looking at the back corner of the room, her face pale and wide-eyed. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Carla didn't answer. She just stood there, frozen, as though she hadn't heard me. I followed her gaze. My heart skipped a beat. There was someone standing in the shadows. A figure. Tall, thin, cloaked in dark, ragged clothes. But what really made my blood run cold was the fact that its face was completely covered by a hood, and in the space where its face should have been, There was nothing. Just darkness. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I wanted to run, but my feet felt glued to the floor. I looked back at Carla. She was still staring, her eyes wide with terror, but she couldn't move either. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure was gone, vanished into thin air. I turned to Carla, my breath coming in shallow gasps. "Carla!" I grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the door. She didn't respond, still in some sort of trance. Finally, she blinked and looked at me, her face drained of color. "We need to leave," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Now." We ran. We didn't stop until we were miles away from that cabin, and by the time we made it back to the trailhead, the sun was setting. Carla didn't say much the rest of the way. She just kept looking over her shoulder, as though expecting to see the figure again. I haven't seen her since. She never answered my calls, and I found out later she moved to another state, without a word. I don't blame her. I haven't been back to those woods, and I don't plan on it. I don't even like to think about that cabin anymore. But I can't stop wondering, who was the woman in the photo? And what did I really see in that corner? The figure. It wasn't a person. At least, I don't think it was. I think whatever was in that cabin is still out there. And sometimes, when the wind howls through the trees at night, I wonder if it's following me. Story 2. It started with the sound of scratching. It was faint at first, so I tried to ignore it. I was at my apartment, working late on a project, trying to finish before the deadline. The noise wasn't consistent, just a soft, intermittent scratching, like something small was moving in the walls. I figured it was probably a rodent, or maybe a tree branch scraping against the window. But it kept going. Around midnight, I decided I'd had enough. The scratching was starting to get to me, like nails on a chalkboard, and I had no patience for it. I grabbed a flashlight and went to investigate. The apartment building was old, built in the 1920s, so the walls were thin and creaky. I wasn't surprised when the sound led me to a wall near the kitchen. It was where the scratching seemed the loudest. I knocked on the drywall, trying to see if it was hollow behind it. Nothing, just solid. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I wasn't prepared for what happened next. The scratching stopped. For a second, the apartment was eerily quiet. Too quiet. Then, just as I turned to walk back to my desk, a loud thud came from the other side of the wall. My heart skipped a beat. It was much heavier than a rodent. Much too deliberate. I froze. My mind raced through possible explanations, but none of them made sense. I wasn't sure if I should call someone, maybe a plumber or the landlord. But what would I even say? I think there's something in the wall? I took a deep breath and decided to go back to my work. It was probably nothing. Maybe a water pipe or some old plumbing. Or I didn't want to think about it. The next night, the scratching was back. This time, it was louder, more persistent. It felt like it was getting closer, like something was crawling behind the wall. I stood there, my breath shallow, trying to figure out what to do. I decided to confront it. I grabbed a knife, from the kitchen drawer and started cutting into the wall. The drywall was old and brittle, so it didn't take much to make a hole. The flashlight beam trembled in my hand as I made the incision, my fingers slick with sweat. Finally, I peeled back a piece of the wall. There was nothing there. No pipes, no wires, just insulation and more drywall. I stared at the hole, trying to make sense of it. Then, something caught my eye. A hand. It was a pale, skeletal hand reaching out from the darkness of the wall, its fingers crooked and misshapen. I screamed and backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. The hand recoiled, disappearing into the void behind the wall, as though it had never been there. My mind couldn't process what had just happened. There was no way that had been real. I grabbed my phone, calling my landlord. It rang several times before he picked up, his voice groggy from sleep. "Hello? Mr. Davidson," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need you to come over right now. There's something in the walls. I don't know what it is, but I think there's something alive in here." He was silent for a moment, then let out a tired sigh. "There's nothing alive in the walls. I'm sure of it. It's an old building. Old buildings make noises." "I saw something," I insisted. "I saw a hand. Calm down," he interrupted. "I'll come over in the morning. We'll look at it then, okay?" But I couldn't wait until morning. I stayed up the entire night, the scratching echoing through my apartment. Every time I tried to sleep, the sound would start again, more frantic this time. It felt like whatever it was behind the wall was trying to get out. By dawn, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my bag and left, running out of the apartment as fast as I could. I didn't care if I was overreacting. I didn't care if people thought I was crazy. I wasn't going to stay there another minute. I stayed with a friend for a couple of days, hoping the problem would go away. But it didn't. Mr. Davidson called me the next morning, saying he'd sent someone to check the wall. They had fixed the problem, he said. No more scratching, no more noises. I didn't ask what they'd found. I didn't care. I just wanted to leave. But before I moved out, I took one last look at the apartment. Just to be sure, I walked into the living room, my heart racing, expecting the walls to be quiet. But as I stood there, the scratching started again. This time, it was louder, more urgent. I ran to the wall where I'd cut it open before. There was nothing there, just a perfect, unbroken surface. But as I stood there, frozen in fear, I felt something cold and wet touch my skin. A hand. It was back. I turned around slowly, my stomach churning. Behind me, in the corner of the room, a man stood there, his face gaunt and hollow, eyes wide, with a crazed, unnatural intensity. His mouth twisted into a grin as he took a step toward me. "You shouldn't have left," he whispered, his voice like sandpaper. And then everything went dark. I don't know how I got out of there. I don't know if I ever will. But I haven't been able to forget the face or the sound of those hands scratching behind the walls. Story 3. I didn't believe in ghosts, at least not until that night. I had always been skeptical, chalking up every strange noise or flicker of light to natural explanations. My friend Mike, on the other hand, was a firm believer. So when he suggested we spend the weekend in an old, supposedly haunted inn on the outskirts of town, I agreed purely for the laughs. I thought it would be nothing more than a joke. We arrived late in the evening, after the sun had already set. The inn was isolated, nestled between thick woods and a winding road. It had been around since the early 1800s, its faded brick exterior covered in ivy, with peeling shutters hanging crookedly. It was the kind of place that looked like it belonged in an old black and white horror film. The innkeeper, an elderly man with a hunched back, greeted us at the door. He was quiet, almost too quiet, and his eyes darted nervously around, as if expecting someone or something to jump out at him. 2 rooms? He asked in a rasping voice. I nodded, trying to ignore the creeping unease settling in my stomach. Mike was already grinning like he was in on some private joke. Upstairs, the rooms are ready, but be mindful of the old building, the innkeeper warned, his voice lower now. Some rooms are best left alone. I raised an eyebrow. You don't seriously believe in ghosts, do you? I asked, half smirking. His gaze sharpened. I've seen things you wouldn't want to know about. He let out a dry cough and quickly turned away, leading us up to the 2nd floor. We chose rooms across the hall from each other. As soon as I stepped into my room, a chill ran down my spine. The air smelled faintly of mildew and old wood, but it wasn't the smell that bothered me. It was the silence. No hum of electricity, no creak of the floorboards, just dead, oppressive stillness. After Mike and I settled in, we went downstairs for dinner. The innkeeper was gone, and the dining area was empty. Just 2 old candles flickering on a table in the center of the room. The only sound was the soft, distant ticking of an antique clock. Weird, I muttered. Feels like we're the only ones here. Mike laughed, but there was something nervous about it. Perfect place for a ghost story. We ate in silence, but the longer we sat, the more uncomfortable I felt. I kept catching glimpses of shadows moving in the corner of my vision. When I turned to look, nothing was there. I tried to shake it off, but it didn't help. It was like being watched. When we returned to our rooms, Mike was already acting odd. He looked at the door across the hall, his face pale. You all right, man? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Mike nodded quickly. Too quickly. Yeah, just weird vibes in this place. You know? I laughed it off and went to bed. But sleep didn't come easily. I kept hearing things, faint footsteps, soft whispering. I told myself it was just the house settling, old pipes, the wind outside. But every time I tried to drift off, the sounds grew louder. Then at around 2 a.m., I heard a knock on my door. My heart skipped a beat. Who could it be at this hour? Mike? I called out, my voice hoarse with confusion. No response. I opened the door slowly, only to find the hallway empty. There was nothing there. just the same dark, quiet corridor. But something was wrong. The air felt thicker, colder. I turned to head back into my room, but just then, a voice, low and cold, whispered from behind me, "Leave, now." I froze. The voice wasn't Mike's, and it wasn't the innkeeper's. It was hollow, echoing, like it was coming from deep within the walls. I spun around, but no one was there. My skin crawled. I slammed the door shut and locked it, trying to calm my racing heart. I wasn't sure if I was imagining things, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Minutes passed, then hours. I eventually drifted off into an uneasy sleep, only to wake up what felt like moments later. The room was colder than before, and I could see my breath in the air. The knocking started again. This time, it was louder, more insistent. I jumped out of bed and rushed to the door. I opened it without thinking, but again, nothing. The hallway was empty, though the air was thick, like the room itself was holding its breath. Then I heard it again, that whisper, "Leave now." This time, the voice came from the stairs, deep in the shadows. I knew, instinctively, I shouldn't go toward it, but my legs moved before I could stop myself. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended into the darkened hall. The inn was unnervingly quiet, too quiet. No sounds of wind or life, just silence. I reached the bottom of the stairs and saw the front door, slightly ajar. A draft pulled at the curtains, and the door creaked open further, as if inviting me to leave. I stepped toward the door, my heart hammering. But before I could reach it, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from behind me. I spun around, and there she was, a woman, pale and gaunt, dressed in an old-fashioned nightgown. Her face was ashen, her eyes hollow. She was standing at the bottom of the stairs, staring at me with an expression of sorrow and malice, all at once. "Why are you still here?" she whispered, her voice like the rustling of dead leaves. I didn't have time to react before she vanished into the shadows. I ran. I didn't look back. I grabbed my things and bolted from the inn, slamming the door behind me as I ran into the night. I don't know what happened to Mike. I don't know if he's still there. I tried to contact him after I left, but his phone went straight to voicemail. The inn, the place we stayed, is gone now, completely gone. No sign of it ever being there, as if it was erased from existence. I don't know who that woman was or what she wanted, but I do know this. There's something in that place, something old, something angry. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I hear that whisper, "Leave now."